In June 2010, SpaceX launched their first rocket from the Falcon 9 family. Since then, they've managed to launch rockets from the Falcon 9 family an amazing 104 times. And more incredibly, 102 of those launches have been successful. One of the remaining launches was a partial failure and the other one resulted in the loss of spacecraft. Just this year, the Falcon 9 had more than 20 launches, and today on Super Freaky Science, we're going through all of them and what they mean for the future of space travel. January to April. The first launch of the year had a Starlink Payload. This launch took place on the 7th of January 2020 and was the third large batch and second operational flight of the Starlink Constellation. The Starlink Constellation is a side project of SpaceX that seeks to create a constellation of satellites to create cheaper internet access. Ideally, the constellation will consist of thousands of tiny shoebox-sized satellites in low Earth orbit working with a combination of ground receivers. This launch took about 60 of the satellites to low Earth orbit, with one of them including a test coating to make the satellites less reflective and thus more unlikely to interfere with ground-based astronomic observations. The next launch was the Crew Dragon in-flight Abort test. This launch took place on the 19th of January 2020 and was an atmospheric test of the Dragon 2 Abort system. The launch was successful. After that was another Starlink launch, the third operational and fourth batch of the Starlink satellite launch. The launch was successful and about 60 more satellites were added to the constellation in low orbit. On the 17th of February, another 60 batches of the Starlink satellite were readied for launch. It was the fourth operational and fifth largest batch of the Starlink satellites to be launched. However, this launch used a new flight profile, which deployed into a 212 by 386 km elliptical orbit instead of launching into a circular orbit and firing the second stage engine twice. Unfortunately, the first stage booster failed to land on the drone ship, marking the first time a proven flight booster failed to land. The next launch was the last launch of Phase 1 of SpaceX's CRS contract. Before the launch, there was a second stage engine failure that delayed the launch for about 5 days. The launch was successful and it was SpaceX's 59th successful landing on a single stage booster. The 18th of March saw the launch of another batch of 60 satellites. However, like the launch preceding it, the launch booster landing failed. It was the second Starlink booster launched booster landing failure in a row. It was later discovered that the failures had been caused by residual cleaning fluid trapped in a sensor. After the March 18th launch, there was another Starlink launch on the 22nd of April. And this time, the launch booster landing was a success. The launch also made the Falcon 9 the most flown operational US rocket. May to August. On the 30th of May, the first crewed orbital flight from American soil since 2011 was launched atop the Falcon 9. The next launches on the roller coaster were the 7th and 8th operational Starlink satellite launches with 60 satellites each like before. The next launch was for a contractor and was named after the late commander of the 21st Space Wing, Colonel Thomas G. Falzarano. After that was a launch contract by South Korea's Defense Acquisition Program Administration in 2014. The launch was the 57th recovery of a Falcon 9 first stage, and for the first time, both firing halves were also caught by a firing catching ship. The booster that launched this rocket was the same one that launched the crewed Dragon Demo 2 spacecraft. This meant that the launch featured a booster reflight within 51 days, a new record turnaround for a Falcon booster. This was followed by a 9th operational launch of Starlink satellites. This time, the rocket carried 57 Starlink satellites and 2 Black Sky satellites as part of SpaceX's rideshare program. The next flight was the 10th operational Starlink satellite launch and carried 58 Starlink satellites with 3 SkySat rideshare satellites. It also marked the first time a booster made the 6th flight that same year. At the end of August, SpaceX marked the 100th launch in its history. The launch deployed satellites by Argentina's space agency, CONEA, and 2 rideshares. September to December. September for SpaceX started with the 11th operational launch of the Starlink satellites. This brought the total to about 700 launched Starlink satellites, but SpaceX wasn't done yet. A month later, there was another Starlink satellite launch. The Falcon booster used for this flight was the B-1058, and it holds the title for the shortest time a booster reached 3 flights, which is 129 days, beating the B-1046 by 77 days. This means that the B-1058 had an average turnaround time of about 64 days. 12 days later, there was another operational launch of Starlink satellites, and it marked the second time a booster was flown 6 times. That same month, the 4th operational Starlink satellite rocket was launched, and it marked the 100th successful launch of a Falcon vehicle. Earlier the next month, SpaceX fulfilled contractual obligations by launching a satellite to keep the Navstar global positioning system operational. The manufacturing contract for the satellite was awarded in January 2012, and it underwent vacuum testing in December 2018. The launch contract of the satellite was awarded to SpaceX in March 2018. There was a launch attempt on October 3, 2020. However, the flight was aborted 2 seconds after liftoff after an early start to 2 engines. After the abort and failure of the mission, the engines from the B-1062 were sent off for further testing. The abortion of the mission also delayed the Crew 1 launch because of the time it took to review the engines. On the 16th of November saw one of SpaceX's most important Falcon launches of the year, the first crewed rotation of the commercial Crew program. The launch followed the return of the Crewed Flight Test Mission Crew 2 demo. The mission was originally designated US-CV-1 by NASA, and it carried astronaut Mike Hopkins, Shannon Walker, Sochi Noguchi, and Victor Glover for a 6-month stay on the International Space Station. The Boeing Starliner OFT-2 was expected to dock aboard the ISS during that time too. Interestingly, the flight was meant to have been launched way back in 2017. However, preparations for the flight only rounded up in 2020. Just 5 days later, SpaceX had another Falcon 9 launch. This time, it was a satellite that was named after the former director of NASA's Earth Science Program. The satellite was a radar altimeter satellite that was part of the Ocean Surface Topography Constellation. It was also a follow-up to the Jason 3, a satellite altimeter created by a partnership of the European Organisation for the Exploration of Meteorological Sciences and NASA. On the 25th of November, SpaceX broke yet another record by launching a booster for the 7th time. It was also the first time SpaceX had managed 4 launches in a single month. The latest launch of the year came on the 6th of December. It was the first launch of Phase 2 of the CRS contract of 6 launches that was awarded to SpaceX in 2016. It was also the first launch of the upgraded version of the Cargo Dragon 2 spacecraft, with increased payload capacity and autonomous docking to the ISS. Plans for 2021 and beyond. As far as space launches go, 2020 was one of the biggest years for SpaceX. The company broke so many launching records and met so many targets that it's hard to imagine that it's not upwards and onwards from here. In 2021, the company plans to even double the number of launches it undertook in 2020 by planning to have 54 launches for the Falcon 9 and another for the Falcon 10 Heavy. 2022, Musk says, will be an even bigger year for SpaceX as far as launches are concerned. The company plans to make at least 60 launches from their Florida base alone in 2022. There's also a plan to make at least 60 launches every year from 2022 onwards. Those are big dreams and certainly wouldn't be easy to reach that target. But SpaceX has reliably shown over the years that it's a company that can break barriers, records, and hit set targets. So it's not stupid to bet that SpaceX would be able to undertake this volume of launches. After all, the company started with just 7 launches a year, and now they've made over 20 launches this year alone, and they are threatening to make even more. That's it, guys. If you enjoyed this video about SpaceX and their amazing 2020, smash the like and subscribe buttons and look through the channel. We've got great SpaceX content for you. Goodbye, and remember to stay safe.